before the giant fell, before the crown of gold was forged, before the songs of a shepherd king echoed through the eternal halls of Jerusalem. There was only the dust. To understand the king, you must first understand the wilderness. The Judean desert is a harsh, unforgiving teacher. It is a land of jagged, sun-bleached rocks and desperate, clinging scrub brush. It is a place where the sun beats down like a brass hammer on an anvil, baking the earth until it cracks. And when the sun dips below the horizon, the nights plunge into a bitter, biting cold that aches deep within the marrow of the bones. It is here, in the vast, empty silence, completely isolated from the politics of men, that a king was born. Not in a palace of cedar, not in a pavilion of silk, but in pastures of dirt, sweat, and blood. At this time, the nation of Israel was trembling. High in his fortress, King Saul was unraveling. The Spirit of the Lord had departed from him, replaced by a dark, suffocating paranoia. To the west, the Philistines were gathering like a storm on the edge of the sea, sharpening their iron, preparing to wipe the Israelites from the face of the earth. Israel needed a savior. They were looking for a giant. God was looking for a shepherd. His name was David. He was the youngest of Jesse's 8 sons, a boy of barely 16 years. He was lean, sun-baked, and weathered beyond his age, with hands heavily calloused from the rough wood of the shepherd's crook and the taut strings of a wooden lyre. While his older, broader brothers marched off in the gleaming, heavy armor of King Saul's militia, eager to win glory and bleed for Israel, David was left behind. He was the afterthought, the runt. He was told to watch the sheep, to tend the ewes, to stay out of the way of real men in real wars. His brothers mocked him. They saw a boy with his head in the clouds, singing psalms to the empty canyons, weeping over sick lambs. They did not understand that the wind was listening to those songs. They did not know that the Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, the height, the muscle, the armor. But the Lord looks at the heart. And David's heart was being hammered, folded, and forged in the wild. The first true test of this forging came under the cold, silver light of a full moon. It was the dead of winter. David sat alone at the entrance of a makeshift sheepfold, a fragile, circular ring of stacked limestone rocks and thorny acacia branches woven together. He was the gate. His own body was the only barrier between his father's vulnerable flock and the creeping horrors of the dark. As the wind howled mournfully through the canyon walls, an eerie stillness settled over the camp. The normal, rhythmic chirps of the night insects suddenly ceased. The wilderness held its breath. Then came the scent, a foul, musky stench of wet fur and decay carried on the breeze. Next came the sound, the heavy, terrifying snap of a thick branch breaking under immense weight. Out of the ink-black darkness emerged a waking nightmare of muscle, fur, and insatiable hunger. A Syrian brown bear. It was a beast weighing over 400 pounds, a primal force of nature drawn by the scent of the huddled, shaking flock. It did not hesitate. The bear smashed through the thorny acacia wall as if it were made of dry straw. The sheep scattered in a blind, bleeding panic, crashing into one another in the dark. The bear lunged. Its massive, slavering jaws clamped down mercilessly on the hind leg of a small, white lamb. The lamb let out a piercing, terrified shriek. Fear is a natural thing. It is the body's warning system. Any sane man would have run. Any ordinary boy would have hidden behind the boulders, covered his ears, and wept while the beast took its prize. But David did not run. In that fraction of a second, something ancient and divine ignited within his chest. Adrenaline drowned his terror. This flock belonged to his father. They were entrusted to his care. David sprinted toward the massive predator, wielding nothing but a heavy wooden staff. With a guttural battle cry that shattered the silence of the night, he swung the wood with everything he had, striking the bear squarely across the snout. A sharp crack echoed in the night. The beast roared in shock and blinding pain, dropping the bleeding lamb from its jaws. It whirled around and rose on its hind legs. It towered a full 3 feet over the young shepherd, blocking out the moonlight. It swiped a massive, razor-clawed paw, a blow that could instantly crush a grown man's skull. David ducked. He felt the terrifying wind of the claws brush past his cheek. He rolled through the dirt and dropped his staff. He reached to his belt. In one fluid, endlessly practiced motion, he drew his sling. He loaded a single, perfectly smooth river stone. He did not aim with his eyes. He aimed with the steady, quiet faith that had been cultivated in hours of solitude. He spun the leather. The stone cut through the firelight like a shooting star. It struck the bear directly between the eyes with a sickening, deafening impact. The beast's momentum carried it forward, but its legs gave out. It crashed heavily into the dirt, carving a trench in the soil, sliding to a halt mere inches from David's boots. Silence violently returned to the canyon. David stood frozen. He looked at the mountain of dead fur at his feet. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling so violently he could barely clasp them together, and he praised the God who trains a man's hands for war. When the sun rose, David skinned the beast. He carried the heavy, blood-matted pelt miles back to Bethlehem. He dropped it onto the stone floor of the courtyard at his father's feet. His older brothers, Eliab and Abinadab, stopped sharpening their swords. They stared in absolute disbelief, their envy radiating from them like heat from an oven. They scoffed. They called it luck. Eliab accused David of finding the bear already dead in a ravine, claiming the boy had simply skinned a carcass to play the hero while real soldiers prepared for war. But Jesse, his father, looked at his youngest son and saw something different. He saw the cold steel underneath the boy's dirt-streaked face. The bear was a monumental victory. But the wilderness is not a place that allows you to rest on past triumphs. The wilderness demands constant vigilance. The Lord was not finished preparing his king. Months passed. The cold winter faded into the brutal, oppressive heat of the Judean summer. The earth was parched, the grass withered to brown husks, and water was scarce. Deep in the wilderness of Ziph, the air shimmered with the heat. David, now older, harder, and deeply attuned to the rhythms of the wild, guided his thirsty flock into a narrow, rocky ravine to find shade beneath the overhanging cliffs. High above them, crouching entirely motionless on a sun-baked ledge, golden eyes watched. An Asiatic lion. Unlike the bear, which was a creature of brute force and noise, the lion was a phantom of pure, stealthy grace. Its golden coat blended perfectly with the dry, scorched sandstone. It began its descent, moving like water over the rocks, placing massive paws perfectly so as not to dislodge a single pebble. Down in the suffocating heat of the ravine, David felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A heavy, oppressive dread filled the air. The sheep began to pace nervously, bumping into one another. David trusted the wilderness. More importantly, he trusted the sudden, sharp unease in his spirit. He reached to his pouch, loaded a stone into his sling, and kept it loose in his right hand. He scanned the ridges. Left, right, up. Nothing. Then, the shadow dropped from the sky. The lion landed in the very center of the flock with a thunderous roar that reverberated off the canyon walls like a physical blow. Dust exploded into the air, blinding and choking. The beast moved with terrifying speed. It snagged a large, heavy ram in its jaws, its teeth sinking deep into fleece and flesh, and turned to drag its prize up the steep incline of the ravine. This time, there was no trembling. There was no hesitation. There was only a cold, righteous, consuming fury. This flock was David's charge. To steal from him was to defy the very calling on his life. David sprinted after the lion. He swung his sling and let the stone fly. It was a glancing blow, striking the lion hard in the ribs. It did not kill. It only enraged. The lion dropped the bleeding ram. It turned, locked its golden eyes on the boy, and let out a roar that shook the very stones of the earth. It charged, covering the distance between them in 3 massive, terrifying bounds. David had absolutely no time to reload his sling. He dropped the leather cord. He gripped his wooden staff with both hands, raising it like a spear. The lion leapt. It launched its 500-pound body through the air, claws fully extended, aiming straight for David's throat. David planted his feet. He thrust the heavy staff upward, wedging the thick wood directly into the lion's open mouth as it descended upon him. The beast's jaws clamped down, splintering the thick wood instantly into jagged shards. The sheer kinetic force of the pounce slammed David backward. He hit the dusty canyon floor with bone-jarring force, the breath violently expelled from his lungs. He was trapped underneath a thrashing, roaring fury. The smell of the lion, hot blood, wild musk, and rotting meat filled his nose. The beast tore at the earth with its back claws, missing David's face by a fraction of an inch, frantically trying to spit out the broken wood to reach the boy's soft flesh. It was a struggle of pure, unadulterated survival. The lion finally snapped the staff in 2. Its jaws lunged downward. In a moment fueled by a strength that was not his own, David reached up with his bare left hand. He plunged his fingers deep into the lion's thick, coarse mane. He gripped the heavy skin at the back of its neck, and with a monstrous effort, he pulled its terrifying, snapping jaws away from his throat. With his right hand, he reached to his belt. He drew his shepherd's knife, a short, crude, but razor-sharp blade of iron. He did not hesitate. He did not close his eyes. He drove the iron blade deep upward into the soft, vulnerable underside of the lion's jaw, straight into its brain. The beast stiffened. A horrific, wet gurgle escaped its throat. Its golden eyes rolled back into its skull. The massive body went completely limp, collapsing entirely onto the chest of the shepherd boy. Slowly, painfully, David shoved the dead weight of the apex predator off his bruised ribs. He sat up. He was covered head to toe in white dust and red blood. His tunic was torn to ribbons. His arms and chest were deeply scratched. But he was breathing. He was alive. He didn't cheer. He didn't boast to the empty canyon. He quietly crawled over to the injured ram, resting a gentle, steadying hand on its head. He looked up at the narrow strip of blue sky visible above the canyon walls. Tears of exhaustion and awe cut clean tracks through the dirt on his face. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion," he whispered, his voice echoing softly against the rock, "and from the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from the hand of any enemy." He stood up. If you had been there to see him, you would have noticed that his posture had changed. The boy who sang to the clouds was gone. The warrior, anointed by God, had finally been born. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and bleeding orange, David stood on a high, windy ridge. The flock grazed safely behind him, In the far distance, many miles away, visible only as a haze of dust on the horizon, the armies of Israel and Philistia were gathering in a place called the Valley of Elah. David didn't know it yet. He didn't know that a champion of Gath, a giant who defied the armies of the living God, was waiting in that valley. He didn't know that King Saul was cowering in his tent. But as David reached down to the earth and picked up a single, smooth stone, tossing it lightly in his hand before slipping it into his pouch, he was ready. He picked up his lyre, and as the evening wind blew across the Judean ridge, he began to play a new song. Not a song of a shepherd, a song of a giant slayer, a song of a king.